Welcome to Growth Hack by Poppy Digital. Tips and tricks to master the algorithms from industry insiders. Now here's your host, Julian Espinoza.
Welcome back to Growth Hack, where we break down marketing channels like Google, Facebook, Instagram, and show them how to make them work for you. Have you made it to releasing your 50th podcast episode? What about your 100th episode? If you've reached or are close, you know how much work is required on a weekly basis. So why would taking a break be a hack? Well, we bring on Kyla Carneiro, an ex-Spotify producer and podcaster who has had a show for 7 years to teach us the magic of taking a break on your podcast. Kyla has worked on Spotify shows like Living and Learning with Reba McEntire, the 33 and Third podcast, and We Said What We Said with Rickey and Denzel, as well as independent shows like So It's a Show, a Gilmore Girls fan podcast. Welcome, Kyla.
Thanks, Julian.
Yeah, really happy that you're here, and we're going to be talking about podcasts. Are you ready?
I'm always ready to talk about podcasts.
Amazing. So, we have shows, and they start off, and it's super exciting. We get to episode 3, we're pumped up. 4 or 5, it starts to wane, and there's a lot of drop off. They say most shows don't make it past episode 8. Then there's these other cliffs. People don't make it past episode 50. People don't make it past episode 100. Why do you think people don't make it past these particular milestones?
Because it's a big commitment. I mean, it takes a lot of effort and focus to continue on something, especially like podcasting that takes a while to see the results. And so if you're expecting to see marketing investors and hundreds and thousands of listeners at the beginning, then you're not going to be satisfied when you get going. So it's going to be really easy to drop off. So I think it's having the right expectations and your reasons for doing it need to be longevity goals and not just quick in the moment.
And it's funny, it doesn't matter what platform we're talking about, Instagram, YouTube, Snapchat, whatever it is that we're talking about. Usually that is obviously a very consistent common denominator amongst these platforms and whatever distribution is the consistency and essentially the longevity. So I really kind of like what you're talking about, keeping this going. So for the audience, how long have you had your show going?
We are in our 6th year, our 6th season. So started at the end of 2016 and still going strong. Should I explain what it is?
We'll definitely get there, but I think that just sets a lot of context, right? It's like you've been going on for 6 years. That's very, very impressive. How many episodes is that? Do you know?
It's 120 something. We've done some bonus episodes, and so we don't really count those in the official count, but it might be 130 or so. But we've cover Gilmore Girls, and so a pop culture reference from each episode on So It's a Show. So we always knew from the get-go, we have 7 seasons. We could do this for 7 years if we wanted to. And so we've been able to do that.
It's incredible. How do you think, and I'm sure there's probably been lots of strategies, hair pulling, blood, sweat, and tears to sort of get to where you are. So, and that's what we're here to do, is to talk about that blood and sweat and tears and what that looks like. So someone can either prepare themselves or use these tools and these things as hey, maybe I don't want to go on that kind of a journey. So let's talk a little bit. What have you learned in the last 6 years that you think has been key to being able to be consistent?
Yeah, so I started the show with my co-host Taylor because I loved Gilmore Girls, but I also loved the pop culture references that they shared. And I was always so confused, though, also by them because I wasn't I wasn't of the same generation as the show creator, Amy Sherman-Palladino. And so I just wanted to understand what in the world these characters who I loved were talking about, what they meant with each of these references. So I thought, I love watching old TV shows and old movies and discovering them for the first time years later. So what if I could do that and turn that into a podcast, which is what I also love. So the goals have stayed the same. Every episode we get to watch a TV show, watch a movie, do some research about it. My co-host Taylor, she really enjoys getting into the awards and into some of the histories. I like to watch YouTube interviews just minutes and minutes of those with the actors from the shows. And so we both research, which can sound like a difficult, heavy lift, but we're both researching even in the way that we enjoy. So we keep getting to do what we already loved, which is going down a YouTube rabbit hole, going down, Vogue article rabbit holes. And so that has remained the same, which has helped keep it going, because not only are we creating a podcast that we love, but we're creating it in a way that we also love.
It's so funny. It's like it's such a basic like concept, right? It's like, do something that you love, right? And it's really hard to sort of apply that. I think to your point, you have to find a mission, a passion. You have to find something, and so to offer some parallels with Growth Hack and our show, it's very similar. I love learning about new channels. I love learning about different ways on handle the existing channels that I've handled. I love interviewing or speaking. Not interviewing. I love speaking to people who are really good at their craft. That's just an interest to me. So obviously it makes me a great candidate for podcasting. But then the mission, to your point, right? So that's the process, right? But the mission is I hate. And by the way, if we ever do this, please send us a DM, reach out to me. If we're ever going on these really long tangents and our podcast is filled with a lot of fluff, please tell me, because that's what I hate. I hate listening to marketing podcasts that are super fluffy, that are like, oh my God, you're so great. And like, oh, you're great. What's your background? So tell me more about like your childhood. Like, that is not what we're here. We are a marketing podcast. We're in the marketing industry. Like, we want to hear the value. Like, just give us the value. We don't have a lot of time, and our episodes are between 10 to 15 minutes. So I agree with you. The mission and the process should coincide to that. So that's awesome. I wanted to ask you, there's a stigma around releasing content on a religious basis, on a really regular cadence. Talk to us a little bit about like what that looks like relative to 120 episodes over 6 years, and how that applies to you, and what that means to you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, consistency is important, right? We hear that all the time, but there are ways to be consistent and keep your sanity. So since we started the podcast, I have moved three times, including across the country. Taylor has moved. We've had, global trips. And so a lot of things going on that we can't just keep going at our regular cadence, which we also release every other week, which has also helped keep us sane, because we both have always worked full-time jobs in addition to the podcast. So when we need a break, we give ourselves that. And we've been having a lot more lately, and it hasn't been affecting our listeners. But what we do is we replay an episode. We record a short 2-3 minute intro, the two of us, which is, of course, a very easy, quick thing to fit into our schedules, even when we're busy, and put out a episode that we've released maybe a while ago, maybe a little bit recently, and we try to find one that fits with something that's happening now. So, for example, we recorded an episode about Top Gun, I think maybe last year, and then the new movie has recently come out, and so we needed a break recently. So we re-released that episode, talked about how the new Top Gun is coming out, and so it still kind of fit. It fit with what was happening in the world. So we've also done some fun episodes that are a lighter lift, not as much research, and release those. And so we found ways to keep consistency and keep ourselves sane. We did take a long break over our second Christmas, and we didn't release anything, and we did see a major drop off of listeners. So it was difficult to get those numbers back up. So now we have found this new way to keep consistent, but give ourselves a break.
Yeah, and I think that's incredibly important. I remember in our early times, I think we were around episode 15 or 16, we had sort of ran out of content. We had essentially built all this content in a short time, and we had ran out. We didn't have any more, and I was fumbling to get a guest, and I was fumbling to get this, and I was fumbling to get that, and it was just it was becoming overwhelming, right, for us. And so vacations, sickness, company stuff, just all sort of cascaded and compounded into one. And I didn't release an episode for, maybe, 3 or 4 months. And then I came with the mission, and I came back with Veracity. And ever since that peak, we've gone from like episode 16, 17 all the way to we're recording episode 69 here. And so we've just had nonstop. But I am kind of getting to that point in this particular phase of the podcast where I'm like, like we release every week. This is a lot on our lives. It is putting a lot of pressure. I think to your point is maybe we can offer ourselves a little bit of grace and say maybe we do take a pause and really rethink maybe a new strategy. But by the way, like you just gave me a tip and got me thinking, going through our maybe episodes that coincide with each other, like there's themes that like our episodes like, oh, maybe like TikTok or LinkedIn or whatever, and going back to those episodes and maybe extracting, I don't know, 1 to 2 minute clips and then sort of stitching it together in like a compilation, right? And using that, right? And repurposing. So I totally think that makes a lot of sense. And that's a great idea. So tell us now, quickly, like what is we've talked about your Gilmore Girls show, but like give us the quick little pitch on that. And then what other, I think you're working on a couple other projects too, right?
Yeah, so It's a Show is our tagline is a podcast where we attempt to keep up with Lorelai and Rory's pop culture references on Gilmore Girls. If you know the show, you know the characters. But every episode, they list off, just countless pop culture references. And we pick the most mysterious one, the one that's most interesting to us. We dive deeper and we figure out what they meant by that pop culture reference. So we've picked one from each episode, and now we're in season 6. So I am now working on a show that just recently launched for Red Table Talk. It's called Let's Red Table That, and it's the official fan rewatch podcast with 2 OG fans, Tracy Tiro and Cara Presley. And we have guests on who talk about the Red Table Talk episodes a little more in depth, to have a different spin on it, maybe a different story that goes along with the topic.
Can you tell a little bit about Red Table Talk?
Yeah, Red Table Talk is the a Facebook official show with Jada Pinkett Smith, Gammy, her mom, and Willow Smith, Jada's daughter. And it's multi-generational conversations about difficult topics. So some of the new episodes they've had out, they talked about alopecia, they talked about the fentanyl epidemic, and try to raise a lot of awareness for people.
Amazing. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. We'll definitely have you back at some point to talk about the next version of podcasting, maybe where we're going or the directions. But thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great.